So question. Do I have to like say my name or anything like that?
No, you don't have to say anything like that. It's on the screen.
Oh, perfect. See, the magic behind, I'm typically behind the camera, not in front of it. So, you know, a little different having to get used to it all. But my journalism, I guess, lineage up to this point, you know, has been one that's had, I think, a lot of turns and a lot of ups and downs, and really, you know, trying to find who I am, you know, personally through storytelling and through being part of my community. Yeah. I grew up in a little town called Fairmont City outside of St. Louis, about 2,500 people, mostly Hispanic immigrants. The way I got introduced to journalism was a reporter from the Washington Bureau at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch at the time, where local newspapers had enough money that they could have people covering Washington.
The good old days.
Right. I was born in the wrong era, but they came and did a story about immigrants that had come to the Midwest and, you know, why those migration patterns were important and the sense of community, you know, that they've built in the Midwest and, you know, not in these big urban areas like Chicago and LA. And when you think stereotypically like, oh, there's a lot of Hispanic people in these big cities, it's like St. Louis, I would say, is more of a medium-sized city. So we had a reporter follow me and my family around for about a month or two. And we had a photographer, you know, follow us around too and document our life day to day. And that was a really, I think, impactful experience.
How old were you again?
I was maybe in first grade. I must have not been, what is that, like 8, 9, maybe?
Yeah, your ballpark.
Somewhere
like 6, 7.
Yeah, grade school age. And, you know, from that point, that just like left a really long-lasting impression. I think at the end of everything, holding a print product and seeing that's my family. These are the words that my family said, and being able to like really document that and like be able to like tell that story so intimately, that just left a long lasting impression. And the reporter at the time told my mom, hey, you know, anything that he does, make sure he doesn't go into journalism. Of course, I went completely the direction they said not to go in. You know, I've been a little defiant ever since.
Oh my gosh. So when did you first put like pen to paper?
Yeah, so I started off in like middle school, like experimenting with photography. I begged my parents to let me borrow $200 to buy my first like point and shoot camera on like a Black Friday sale or something. And they're like, why? And, you know, there was that interaction with the two journalists growing up. But my mom has boxes and boxes and boxes of snapshots from when she was a teenager, when her and my dad were young. And I would flip through those, and she had all these old cameras, and I thought it was so cool. Yeah. But I didn't want to go and spend money on the film, spend money to get developed and all that. So, you know, I started off by entering my middle school photography contest, and I took a not so great picture of like a cat or something on the street. Like it was not good at all by any means. I thought it would be better if I made it all black and white and like some toy in the cat's mouth I made in color. It was hot pink. So I'm like, this is it. This is, you know, the Picasso of today. No, it wasn't. I got third place. I'm like, hey, I could be good at this. There was a learning curve there, you know. So from there, really started delving into doing portraits and going in and just taking snapshots of my family and friends. And then someone asked me to photograph their wedding, and I had no clue what I was doing. I was watching YouTube videos left and right, trying to figure out, how do I take wedding pictures? I have this one kit lens, and that's it. Yeah. So it was like, okay, just got to be confident about what you're doing, even if you don't know what you're doing. And I keep that to this day. Yeah. You know, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, but you just gotta fake it till you make it, as they say. So,
and that's the intro, because I think we're gonna fake it till we make it through this whole conversation. Episode 87 of the WTF Carbondale podcast, where we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, and we tie it all back together. This little old place we call home, Carbondale, Illinois, and somebody who's called Carbondale, Illinois, home for just long enough to really make an impact. Brian Munoz.
Thanks for having me.
Dude, I'm done. I'm done, dude. I just this complex about mispronouncing your name for years,
Oh my gosh.
and then I jump right into
It's been close enough. And hey, I'll let it slide. You know, you've been asking me to sit down with you and have this chat for a while now, so I owe it to you.
It's been a cool ride thus far. And I mean, it's like the just the things that you've been able to do from this space, right? And it's to hear the description of your childhood, and that like small close-knit communities are a thing that have always been like near and dear to you. So like it's just like always being home when you're in this place.
Right. So this is my 4th year in Carbondale. I, looking back and kind of, my adult life so far.
Your face has aged in these long 4 years, my friend.
Yeah, I've plucked a few gray hairs out through the years. No, but, I started off, after high school, going and trying to figure out what I'm doing for college. Started off as a business major because I was doing portraits. Lasted 2 days in a marketing class, and I was like, nope, this was a mistake. I don't want to do this. So then switched to music ed because, I feel like I have these kind of key things that make up who I am. And one of the big ones is music. I played classical trombone and low brass since I was 10, so I wanted to go into music education because that was one thing that I was always involved in, was music ever since I was little. Did that, found out I was not a great singer. And apparently, in music school, you have to be able to sing scales and be able to understand like the concepts of music theory and all these things that there are some people out there that are incredible at. I was not, but I had come a long way from taking cat pictures and, figured I can do something. So I went to another university a little closer to home for 2 years. It felt too much like high school. Started looking around like some other people, that you've had on this podcast, and trying to figure out where do I want to go. Looked at Mizzou, loved the campus, loved the program. But even though I could see the arch from my house, it was $40,000. And I'm like, I can't afford that. So shopped around and found SIUCarbondale, and I'm like, oh, there's an SIU school down there. Where is Carbondale? There's like corn there. Like I don't know. Coming from St. Louis, a little more urban of an area, comparatively. Was like, I'll give it a shot. Saw the work that the journalism students were doing down here, and just the community storytelling and the impact that they were making. And I'm like, I want to be part of that. And SIU was like, hey, we'll give you money and scholarships. You've had this breadth of experience. By this point, I took a semester off of school because I was in this music ed program for a year and a half. And after that, I was like, I just don't feel like I'm going the right direction. I took a semester off, started up a little online newspaper in Collinsville.
Really?
Yeah, did that for about 6-7 months. At the end of it, hosted a public debate for the people running for mayor. Did this big thing, and I was like, I need to get my degree. I can't just like ride the wave. I need to sit down and focus on this kind of, for me and for my parents, it was this key component of coming to the U.S. is, we want to be here so you have a better future than what we had. And part of that was going to school and getting a degree. So after that, I'm like, I'm going to hunker down. I'm going to do the thing. Came down here, did not know a soul. When I first toured campus, I actually took a Kate flight down. And by the time that plane had touched down in Marion, I'm like, nope, I don't know if I can go back on that plane. But I fell in love with the campus, and the people here. And, it's a place I've called home for the past 4 years. Yeah. So
is it like you just jumped right into the Daily Egyptian, like just...
Yeah.
I'm there.
Right. Yeah. And there were like people that I had been put in touch with, mentors in St. Louis in the media industry. They're like, you need to go to Carbondale. You need to talk to these people, do these things. And I'm like, okay, I did it. And I got to Carbondale pretty like shortly before actually having to start doing things with the Daily Egyptian. I think I got here like 2 days before the eclipse. And, you know, I knew I was coming down here. I knew I was going to be the director of photography at the Daily Egyptian, had done all these like Zoom calls with people around the country doing summer internships and stuff. And we're like, how do we execute this thing where there's going to be thousands of people? Yeah. And I didn't know left from right in Carbondale. I didn't realize how many one-ways there were, you know? you see all these people running into buildings and different things as of late. I was probably one of those people just about when I first got here.
I'm so glad driving made it into this podcast. Thank you, Brian.
Right, absolutely. Got to tie it in.
Yeah, right. Stay relevant to the immediate conversation.
Right. So, yeah, and eclipse happened, and that was a whirlwind that I hope to be back in Carbondale for the next one. And take the things I learned from there, like, you know, expect the unexpected, like clouds over Saluki Stadium when you and, you know, you're next to the New York Times, Reuters, and the Weather Channel. You're all waiting for this one thing, and a cloud just comes leisurely over, and I'm like, okay, expect the unexpected. Yeah. That's a good lesson I think I can take away from Carbondale, because you just never know what you're going to get.
You know, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about, until you said Weather Channel right then and there, that part of the draw to Allen Media being the next purchaser of WSIL TV, that it's the same company that owns the Weather Channel, and like, what better to do than to buy a television in the DMA, television station in the DMA, where the next major meteorological event is occurring. And I don't know if meteorological is the best word or the correct word to describe it, but you get where I'm going with this. So do I. So you touch down and you're immediately like thrust into this massive event to like document something that you don't even have like your head wrapped around yet.
Right. And it's, you have this team of people that are asking you, where do I go? What do I do?
Yeah.
And I haven't even met them in person yet. So luckily, you know, the people at the paper at the time, you know, were super helpful, and they had been in Carbondale a year or 2 or 3 or 4 before. And they're like, okay, let's, you know, sit down and figure out what it is we're doing, because we can't mess it up. You know?
There is no ball to drop here.
Right. This happens once during most of our time in Carbondale.
Yeah.
So we did that, and, you know, it kind of went from there. I started, you know, photographing and doing this, like, assigning, you know, things to company stories in terms of photography. And that was when I really learned how, like, integral the Daily Egyptian was with the community, for better or for worse, and whether people like it or not. I know some other folks on the podcast had mentioned some people's disdain for the Daily Egyptian, and I wasn't even a student yet.
Right.
I was down here touring, and I had gotten was looking to get a minor in Spanish, and my advisor at the time goes, I had just had a camera with me. I wasn't officially working for the Daily Egyptian or anything. He goes, are you one of those Daily Egyptian kids? And I'm like, no, why? He goes, well, they just come here and try to mess things up, trying to mess up good things that happen in Carbondale. And
was your advisor Jay?
No.
Okay, sorry. Not to get started. I was just like, that sounded like a very specific person.
No. This person is not at the university anymore. For reasons that they know. But and at that point I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And started looking at the archives and started looking at the hard-hitting reporting that they were doing through the past several years. And, you know, I just knew how to take pictures. And there was something, like, really insignificant that I wanted, like a list of student emails or something, because I wanted to, like, send people, like, an invitation for a club I wanted to start or something like that. And they're like, we can't give that to you. That's FERPA, you know, this or that. And then I had a professor tell me, why don't you file a Freedom of Information Act? And I'm like, what is that? And he's like, here you go. Let me give you something. And it was like a manual about, like, investigative journalism and stuff. And I'm like flipping through this. I'm like, I can do this. So since then, I probably filed a little over 200, 300 FOIAs, you know, during my time at SIU, looking at different things, trying to, you know, look at stories. And there's always a story in, like, the most boring places, whether that's, you know, a document or an email or a text message or something. And, you know, I keep those boring things in my back pocket, because you just never know what you're going to get.
Yeah. I mean, what's it like feeling like not feeling like, but your job actually being to take on all of this information and essentially be the cheesecloth that is the filter to, stringing out the water and leaving over, curds of knowledge on the other side that are like, this is what people need to know about what's going on here.
Right. And it's really difficult because there's some things that, just are over my head. Yeah. I didn't know the ins and outs of Title IX in athletics and, the ins and outs of university governance and, the stipulations on, what you can and can't do through, state of Illinois law and these things where as journalists, I think we're really lucky. We get exposed to a lot of this and, trying to distill that down. It's talking to experts, in those fields and saying, I need you to dumb this down for me. Yeah. Talk to me like I'm in first grade because that's how simple, we need to make it. Yeah. And not because people can't understand complex issues, but you want it to be easily digestible while still not oversimplifying an issue. Yeah. But I don't know. I think, the first story that we had picked up, from a major newspaper, I think it was like the Tribune or something. I was like, dang, we did a thing. And, this is making an impact. And that impact, and not necessarily it's always like a bad thing. It's just reporting on something like the sign shaker in front of Little Caesars in Carbondale. And, there's a city ordinance that doesn't allow sign shakers because it distracts drivers. And, just bringing awareness to that. And people ended up helping this guy out and helping him transfer stores and stuff. Those little things that impact your direct neighbors, people that you lived with. That's one of the big reasons why I do journalism and why I'm such a proponent of community journalism and investment into, those things that keep folks accountable, but, also highlight the good that's going on in your community. A lot of times people cling to the negative.
My mind right now.
And they're like, why do you only report negative news? Yeah. I mean, we reported some things at the Daily Egyptian where we got death threats and we got threats that we were the reason SIU was dying and all this stuff, not, the turmoil that was going on in the legislature or, the exponential rise in costs of college education in America or anything of that. It was a student newspaper that was the demise of SIU, which I think is a whole ton of baloney. I think SIU is great and Carbondale's great. And I mean, very like I do that
the ebb and flow, the up and down, man. And here's the deal: what people don't understand is it's not the discussion of the issues at hand that lead to problems down the road. It's the fact that anybody was participating in those issues at hand to begin with, and a failure to document and distribute and then digest the reality of those actions within any group of people is what allows us to then make corrective changes.
Right. And you have to learn from your history to make a better future. And that's one thing I try to tell folks when I talk to them about Carbondale, or people talk about, the things that happen here. Oh, this is going on in Carbondale, but it's not going on here. Yada, yada, yada. Crime, illegal things, mischief, whatever the case may be. And, that stuff happens everywhere. It's just whether or not your community has a good, press corps or good media infrastructure that, is willing to spend the time and the resources looking into those things and, keeping folks accountable. Yeah. They call media the fourth estate, the fourth branch. It's a checks and balances.
On the media, the founding fathers thought that the media would be the watchdog in
theory.
But who watches the watchdog? Woof, on the media does. I just butchered their intro line, but that's exactly what I have in mind. So we'll get to your jump to NPR here shortly, but we're still trudging through the entirety of that. So was the Eclipse your first elbow rubbing with the big news guys, and some of those relationships led into working with Reuters and USA Today at later points, or did those relationships spring up completely separate of that initial interaction?
So the Eclipse, I don't think I had much interaction with the national folks, whether that's Reuters or the New York Times or NPR or whatever. I knew I was in contact with the folks at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. They had done the story in my family. I was really interested in photography and visual storytelling, so I had connected with those folks. But really, from that point, from the eclipse, started digging into university athletics and the things that were going on at the time, a Title IX investigation, which led to the men's and women's tennis teams being cut and the women's soccer team to being added, and the politics behind that. To at the time, finding out that the athletics department was, multiple million of dollars in the hole, not to anyone's fault who was necessarily there at the time, but through just years of people not doing the right thing. So did that, and then the next fall, I took really the semester a little bit back from the Daily Egyptian. The big things that I did for them at that point was a follow-up. We had 3 African-American cheerleaders that knelt during the national anthem, right at the latest start of the social justice movement in, across the country. And we had a really good friend and colleague of mine now down at Kennesaw State. They had the same day they had 5 African-American cheerleaders kneel. And basically, we were covering our stories side by side, and we were talking like every week on what's the latest thing that happened with you guys. This is what's going on here. Like, how can we kind of play off of each other? Like, what are things we're not thinking about? And that was one of the great things about, I think, student media, overall, was the fact that people are so willing to collaborate and are so willing to, work across state lines, work across, sometimes countries, to kind of lift each other up, because everyone's in the same boat. We're trying to figure it out. And I will give, folks that have kind of feelings about student media one way or another, we make mistakes. Like,
everybody makes mistakes.
Right.
At every job.
Right. So for me, I'd rather make a mistake on, a city council story or something that in the grand scheme of things maybe isn't as like important as, I'm sitting down with the president or the vice president and I'm interviewing them, and I just butchered a quote that they said and they have it on tape that, you're learning your foundation in these experiential spaces while doing what you need to do in the classroom. Yeah. But, same thing you've mentioned before in other episodes, that experiential learning is really what led me to meet these people from national organizations and be able to reach out. And a lot of it is networking and not being afraid to go outside of your box and talk to people and have conversations with people, even if you don't know them, even if you're like somewhere that you've never been before. Like I did an internship in Arizona. I was in Phoenix for 3-4 months and I didn't know anybody there. So being a people person, is a big aspect of it. And
I mean, you take community with you wherever you go. I mean, and this is really cool, man. And again, the part of the exploratory part of these conversations, where it's nice to have some context with somebody, but not know, the depth of what I'm looking to find out about folks in these talks, and to listen to you just describe like the way that you reach out and just engage with people, and how you can go from a barren social field to a blossoming social field, just because you're looking to recreate a sense of community no matter where you are. And then you also have the tool sets with which to do that, which not everybody has the tool sets to develop that. And media just happens to be one of those things that you can use to develop community.
Right. And that's, despite any stories that like I've worked on in the past or, things I've reported on, at the end of the day, I try not to take myself too seriously. I mean, I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Like, there's a tie-in. Like,
nice.
like really, 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 and, I'm very privileged in, being able to go to college and having these experiences and being able to like have my own camera and all these things. And I know a lot of people aren't, privileged in that way, or have the background, or the like the socioeconomic, functions to be able to do that. I mean, I saved so much money just like over years and years to be able to buy my own equipment. And that was one of the big reasons I came down to Carbondale was, we have the tools for you to just focus on creating and you don't have to worry about all that because we have that for you. Yeah. And other places didn't have that.
Really?
Yeah.
That's not just, they don't just furnish at every journalism school.
Right.
The tools for journalism.
Right. The school I was at before, who I won't name, they didn't have like cameras for students and stuff, and it was like, how do I do this? How do I, we don't have the resources for it, and that was a big barrier for me. I think growing up, I didn't grow up in a wealthy like family or anything like that. So through those connections as well, we've been able to, I've been able to work with other organizations and trying to figure out ways, whether it's through grants or other things, to help, give students from those backgrounds, camera equipment, or be able to, partner with Nikon directly, or whatever the case may be, and organizations out there doing that to, hey, let's do this raffle for a camera because we know that it'll make an impact, on someone's life. And community, just tying that into kind of that overarching thing, just having my camera, I feel like I can document so much of like our community and show that it's not just soybeans and corn,
I love, so, I mean, your parents always kind of understood the value of media in life. I mean, talking about having all of those pictures from when they were younger, and like there's something in there, those memories that they went, yes, we do cherish this, we do value this.
Right. In part, the reporter growing up said, don't do journalism. And I mean, in Mexico, the media landscape is a little precarious in terms of, the prosecution of journalists, there and in other countries. I mean, even like in America, like today you see, journalists beat up, by certain demonstrators. You see journalists beat up by police. You see journalists beat up by, all these other people. And we're like, we're just trying to do our jobs, trying to document what's going on. But that was a big thing that my mom was fearful of, is she's like, I don't want you to be beat up or, persecuted because of what you're doing. And I'm like, luckily I'm not doing international work like that right now. I'm just, here trying to tell community stories. And I have colleagues who, are in those spaces, and like, power to them. Yeah. Like I could not do what they're doing, and it's really incredible. There's somebody I know that's in Afghanistan right now, documented, the rise of the Taliban right now through the region and everything that's going on. And like his name is Marcus Gam with the Los Angeles Times. And he was documenting like a scene or something before. It was like Afghan nationals and like people from the Taliban, and like there was an altercation, and like this guy came up like to him and pistol whipped him on the side of the head, and he's like, please don't kill me, and like it was this whole thing. But my mom sent me, like, they did a story on it, and she sent it to me, and she's like, this is what I'm talking about. And I'm like, I promise. I'm like, unfortunately, that those kinds of things happen all over the world, but I'm in Carbondale. I try to zoom in and really try to hyper focus on being cognizant of those things. And I've worked in spaces where those things are more prevalent, these international issues, these national issues. But for me, like, my heart lies in this local community storytelling.
But how it reflects on the national story, on the international story, on the global story, right? I mean, it's not like you can't find, the exact morsels of humanity in the stories that you tell out of here that are applicable at, macro and micro levels across the board.
Right. And one of those examples I think of is Anna, Illinois, having its first racial demonstration, Black Lives Matter demonstration, in a town that has its history. I mean, Logan Jaff from ProPublica did a feature on Anna, that really ran in the Atlantic as well. And for those who don't know, ProPublica is a nonprofit news organization that does investigative journalism across the country. They have a Midwest bureau based in Chicago. But she did this really in-depth story about, people of color living in Anna and the history of Anna and, the future of it and whatnot. So this was kind of picking up where she left off in this event. And, luckily through different workshops and really putting myself out there, a lot of cold calling, a lot of cold emails on, hey, I'm a journalism student, like, I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. I never expected the feedback that came in to come in. People were so willing to just chat, spend 5-10 minutes on Zoom on like, hey, where are you at? What are you doing? This is what I'm looking for as a hiring manager. Let's keep in touch in case something arises. And that's how I covered that event in Anna for Reuters and worked with a reporter out of New York who typically covers immigration, but she was covering the social justice movement really kicking off. And there had been things up to that point. I mean, in Carbondale, the week of George Floyd's death, a black man who was killed by police in Minnesota, there was a huge candlelight vigil that Chastity Mays organized. And speaking with her, she mentioned, I never realized this many people would come out to this event, and there were hundreds. And this was, at the point where our community was trying to balance, we're in a global pandemic on something we know absolutely nothing about at this point, and people of color being killed. And we didn't know at that point everything that we know now, so there's like that grain of salt to take into consideration. But really, I pitched that to Reuters, and they said, yeah, we want it. So I did a written piece with Micah Rosenberg, the reporter out of New York for them, and I did the visuals for it, and it ran like in CNN and Fox Business and the Washington Post and all these places. Little Southern Illinois was on that level, and it's kind of alluding to what you had mentioned is those national stories are in our communities, and you have to think about how the United States is not a monolith, how rural communities aren't monoliths either. There are people of color that live in rural communities. There are issues that happen in urban areas that happen in rural communities as well, and vice versa, and it's really my goal as a journalist is to break down those kind of notions or those stereotypes or thoughts that people have, in trying to enlighten people a little more or show them that we're not what you think,
Yeah. Do you ever think you'd be so intellectual about this stuff?
No. I'm gonna be real honest. Like starting off in college, I'm like, I just want to like take family pictures, like senior pictures. I just like didn't want to like think about this, and really, and I think more so recently, it's been a lot of, and through like reporting I've done and like things I've looked into and like experience personally, really looking at breaking down what these constructs of media are and like the perception of objectivity, and has been a really big conversation in journalism, because a lot of times the early days of journalism education, it was taught you are a neutral slate, you should not have any opinion, you obviously in reporting are unbiased, and I keep that still as one of my primary tenets is I have my personal like opinions and things, but my reporting I'm going to present both sides of an argument if applicable. Yeah.
If valid, not like
if valid. I'm not.
You're not going to publish like a all for one on why you could use ivermectin. No.
Right. Like COVID. I'm not going to go out of my way to add a voice to a story that of someone saying COVID-19 does not exist. Yeah. Because part of a journalist code of ethics is minimize harm. Yeah. You're not minimizing harm if you're sharing disinformation just to show the other side. Yeah. There's a great saying that goes, as a journalist, your job is to report what's going on. If you look outside and it's raining, you say it's raining. You don't go look for someone that says it's not raining, it's snowing. And I keep that. And sometimes that's hard for people to grasp a little bit. But I think, it plays in, again, with community, because you go and you try to talk to your neighbors, and be present and part of your community. The people I report on, the people I interview, I see at the farmer's market. I see at Walmart. I see, walking their dogs. And there's a sense of trust that's built there because, my neighbor wouldn't lie to me like that. Like we're in it together, and that's something that I really cherish, and I really think, is critical to building trust in communities. So I don't know. I got on a tangent.
I know. I mean, dude, we're just lucky to have this here, man. The reason why this place can be used as some sort of like standard of which you can compare lots of different levels of life and existence is because we have an abundance of storytellers, right? Whereas most places around the country are experiencing desertification of news activity, right? We are in abundance of it in one way, shape, or form or the other. And the other component to this, right, where there are these voids that are being replaced by, unethical sources and, agendaed, platforms, that's not as much of an issue here. There have been, I do not like the fact that the kid that runs Williamson Franklin County News steals a lot of his content, right? I find an issue with that. But that doesn't mean that kid's not actually still out there doing some level of legitimate reporting, like in telling, news and telling stories, not just out there for a particular bend in service of a greater master, and that is something where that is occurring all over the country, all over the globe, where there is a void in news and legitimate storytelling and just fact-based information, that the stuff that's filling it, much like our physical diets, is more like junk food than it is actual comparative vegetables that would be real journalism.
Right. And I think we're really lucky in Carbondale. I mean, between the School of Journalism through the Daily Egyptian and River Region Union Edition and all these different student news organizations, and then independent creators and storytellers, whether that's me or yourself or whatever the case may be, and a lot of the local smaller papers through each of the communities. But I think all in all, we have to be also cognizant of that same thing happening in Southern Illinois, and I think we don't always see it in terms of not as many reporters, not as many, things covered. Some people in their local paper, whether it's the Southern or somewhere else, may say, "Oh, why couldn't this thing be covered?" Or I was reporting, I don't remember who it was for. I was reporting down deep in Southern Illinois for a story, and I had some people that were pretty confrontational about me being there and present and reporting. And I went and had a conversation with them. I put down my camera, put down my notebook, and let's have a conversation because I want to understand why you're feeling what you're feeling. And they said, well, why is it that the news doesn't come in our community unless someone's killed or there's some tragedy?
The resources aren't there.
The resources aren't there. The amount of reporters, the Southern Illinois Press Corps is only so many people. Yeah. There's 18 to 20 counties in what I would consider Southern Illinois, or at least Southern Illinois minus the Metro East.
Yeah, 17. So the area covered by the community foundations are really good benchmark for the 17 lower counties in Illinois really constitute Southern Illinois.
Right. When you go further north, you see, different media organizations' coverage shrink in geographic area. And that's one of the things that we just have to be cognizant of. And in my opinion, you really need to support local news, and you need to support the people that are doing that work in the region, because you won't always have them. And it's not until we don't have them that we start realizing that, oh, no one's covering the school board meeting. No one's covering the city hall meeting. How are tax dollars being spent? Oh, someone just embezzled, $100,000.
And there's at least 3 or 4 of those stories floating around Southern Illinois now of people that have in the past 5 years either been found out or gone to prison or something like that. In excess of hundreds of thousands of dollars from small towns all over.
Right. And those are your neighbors, the people in your community. And, that's one of the really important things that I think about local news is they're the ones doing that work. So because other people aren't going to do it, people have, their day jobs and things. And you think about, people with their own interest, one reason or another, that maybe Southern Illinois isn't seen as profitable as like a Chicago or something, but it doesn't mean that the people here matter any less. And that's something that, you know, one of the big reasons why, you know, I decided to stay after graduation because I transferred as a junior, and after I had gone back home and I'm like, I don't know what I want to do and stuff. I'm like, I think there's stories to be told in Southern Illinois. I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna figure it out. I don't know what I'm doing, but if there's a time to try to figure it out, it's now.
Yeah.
You know, so I did. And I mean, my colleagues that I worked with at the time, you know, at the Southern Illinois, and
You deserved a job
like,
there, man. It's just such a shame. It's such a shame.
There, you know, I wish there were resources available for more people to be able to cover the Southern Illinois community. But there, you know, are people still here that are doing important work. The folks at the Southern now are still busting their tails to tell important stories, and they're doing the work, and they're keeping folks accountable. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. But I just think about all of my colleagues that I've worked with, you know, through the years in Southern Illinois, who may not be working in news now or aren't, you know, in journalism spaces in Southern Illinois, or they've gone and worked somewhere else. And I'm just like, damn, we really did it. And, you know, we really made an impact, and we really tried. Yeah. And that's...
Well, and it's continuing to. I mean, it's cool to see things like Callie picking up, you know, the job at the Southern now, right? Because that says that there is some sort of staying power in what was before you, and then what you added on to it, and then what you passed on down the line, right? Like that, just because your exit at this point doesn't mean that there is now a void. There are still people in there doing the work, grinding it out, like bringing the stories to light. Right,
absolutely. And, you know, I read some of the work and I'm like, that's done now. And it's like, I didn't know that. You know, to provide some context, I think, you know, the last year I've been working with USA Today and doing the national thing through a fellowship program that they established, and that I was very blessed to be a part of. But it was different. I mean, I really had, you know, through my life, these foundations and roots in community, local storytelling, and I had to kind of think outside the box a little bit and amplifying those.
Now beat it up, man. It's an SM58. You can smack it around a little.
Amplifying those stories to, you know, national things. And I mean, it was just such a whirlwind. But after, you know, doing that, and I can get into that a little later, you know.
We only got so much time. No, I'm kidding. 2 hours for you, Brian Munoz. 2 hours.
After doing that, I mean, everything from Joe Biden's inauguration to, you know, capping off with the Tokyo Olympics and being part of like our team doing that work, you know, it's a lot. It's nonstop. And, you know, one of the things that I missed was living next to the people that I was covering, and you know, a lot of other factors into play.
What do you mean you don't live next to Joe Biden?
Right. Yeah, I wish I had a space next to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But
is there a particular story that just like sticks out as like, this is one of the ones that really, or like, do you just have a succession of stories that all have kind of equal weight in your mind, you know, for the work that you've done?
Just overall?
Yeah, just overall. Man. In the past several years, if there's anything that like really, because I mean, dude, you have put media in so many different places and so many like pretty significant ways for coming out of this area. It's like it is difficult to just look at it and go, there's not just one thing out there. I would imagine.
The Anna story, I mean, was a big one, and I mean that first candlelight vigil, you know, at Turley Park. Was really the kickoff of a year's worth of coverage, you know, on the social justice movement in Southern Illinois, and really, you know, that caught like wildfire of people saying enough is enough, and really trying to emphasize maybe it's not happening right now, right here in Southern Illinois. It's still important to be cognizant of these issues going on the broader scope. And I think in Carbondale, you've seen it as the activist community here has been super active since Vietnam. I mean, that era from the war to now, and you look through just the different federal programs that have been in Carbondale, in terms of like racial and restorative justice and different things along those lines. And you just think of how much of a time capsule this community is. And I spent basically a year of my life reporting on that, on those topics and the kind of branches that go off of them in Carbondale and Southern Illinois. So, I mean, that's one of the big ones.
Like core in a tree, man. If you pull out a core sample, you're going to have that one little section that's going to have you in the midst of it.
Right. Former President Donald Trump coming to Murfreesboro.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always a cool experience, being able to cover a sitting president.
You've covered. Okay, yeah. Well, Joe Biden wasn't obviously a sitting president at the time.
Yeah.
So there's like.
It's 2 asterisk.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I covered Donald Trump, and then on the flip side, when Joe Biden was campaigning in St. Louis, I covered that for the New York Times, and having my pictures in the New York Times and like being able to hold that page, it's like journalism goal accomplished. Just to say that I did it. But yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, like those were big ones. It's really hard to pinpoint just one. There's so many that are so, I think, powerful for different reasons. Like one of the COVID related, just kind of a sidebar, in terms of impact, we reported on, Molly Parker and I reported on the Pulaski County Detention Center down in Pulaski County, and how there were advocates and some detainees there through the Department of Homeland Security that were saying, we don't have the appropriate things to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
We don't have the appropriate resources, and city folks and city officials saying, no, that's not true, and back and forth, to the point that led to a congressional inquiry into what is going on there. And, pushing the governor on it. The governor didn't want to talk about it. And then Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth got involved, and they sent I think Chad Wolf, or the acting inspector general for DHS. They sent one of those officials an email that said, what is going on? This is what the Southern Illinoisan and what advocates are saying. Look into it. Yeah. And nothing happened for a while. And recently the, Department of Homeland Security Inspector General came out with a report that said it was true. Everything that, we reported, everything that was going on was true and found in fact, and they weren't being open about it. And the city or the county officials in Pulaski County are in a sticky situation because that ICE contract makes up so much of the county's budget to operate in a county that, aside from that, isn't very wealthy, compared
resources over time
to Northern Illinois. Right. So that happened. And then down the line, I mean, for better, for worse, wherever you stand on the aisle on this, they shut down, or the governor put forward legislation that would basically cut ties with any Department of Homeland Security / ICE contracts with state affiliated detention facilities, jails, etc. So I think that one, just seeing the quickness on this thing happened, people are scared that they're going to get sick and die, talking to like detainees like there, and to the point that action was taken, and then like you kind of have the natural news cycle kind of die off on it, and then, it's getting picked up again because this big action happened. And it's like, okay, was this partly because of our reporting? I don't know. But that was just one that like stood in my head, or stands out in my head, because of the congressional action that was taken so quickly. And on the same accord with USA Today, I did a story in Vegas about this man named Kendrick, who is an Army veteran and was honorably discharged after he got like shrapnel like in his shoulder in Iraq, and this whole thing. He had grown up in California, was an athlete, but felt a duty to serve his country. And his father had served, his grandfather had served, and he's like, I want to do this. Yeah. So he did it, And he got out, and he's like, education is important. I want to support my family. He had been married, or he had gotten married, and they were having kids at that point. He's like, I need to do this. So he went and Googled, universities, trying to find out somewhere to go, and one came up, and it was Argosy University. It was what he didn't understand at the time, a for-profit university, but they had really good marketing material, and it was easy to apply. And he, had inquired about it, and just was like, sure. And they called him shortly after and said, well, let's get you signed up for classes. Classes are starting soon. You're gonna miss out. All this happens. He gets in. The rigor of the classes aren't good. He doesn't feel good about it. He's not having his stipends that are coming back to him from the GI Bill aren't showing up. They get him to take out the max amount of loans, even though the GI Bill covers the majority, if not all of his college expenses. And 3.5 years into his 4-year college education, in the middle of the semester, he gets an email that says, I'm sorry, from one of his professors. I'm sorry, I'm not your professor anymore. Argosy University is shutting down. There's nothing I can do. Yeah. Didn't get his degree. Was in a boatload of debt. Yeah. Got evicted from his house, and his family was on the street. They couldn't even go to a shelter because they wanted to split up his wife and children and him. They wanted him in a men's shelter, and they wanted them in a women's and family shelter. And they're like, you can't be together. So they did a GoFundMe, raised $500, and scrounged up enough to get a cheap motel, and they were living on ramen and pizza. We did this story looking at predatory schools like Argosy University, and it ran front page USA Today, and Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, all these high level, officials within, Congress shared the story and said this isn't okay. We need to do something about this. And now he's getting the assistance to try to recover from, all of this that happened a couple years ago, and he's still reeling from it and trying to rebuild his life. So since then, they moved to DC, which was a little peculiar because they were living in Vegas, which was already kind of expensive, but you're in this peculiar, financial situation. I wouldn't necessarily move to DC in terms of affordability, but they're getting the help that they need to do that. But again, that story had impact, that directly went to help somebody. And that's one of the big things that I think a lot of journalists consider going into the industry is, at the end of the day, we want to help a community, whether that's get out of or shine light on an unfortunate situation, or if it's highlighting something positive that happened, whatever the case may be. We just want to be able to make an impact where we live.
And that story underpins the policy ultimately, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's been a handful of different student loan debt cancellation policy moves, right? And I don't know if the for-profit school issues were one of them or not, right? But if that does happen, stories like that are the ones that feed into whether or not policymakers are going to make the end vote, yay or nay, right, on executing a program that's going to actually help people.
Right. And that's, because, that discussion and that debate, ultimately, many things fall on the political spectrum of if, you're more, conservative or you're more on the Democratic side of things and whatnot. And I think, a lot of people will pin, oh, well, you're just trying to paint a story that, doesn't seem real. And it's this is an Army veteran, one of our armed service members that sacrificed their life, potentially to serve our country. This isn't a Democrat or Republican issue. This is a right and wrong. Yeah. This is people shouldn't be in these situations, or there shouldn't be these situations. So there's a big push. Joe Biden has canceled a lot of student loan debt. I think, don't quote me on this for sure, but at least over a couple millions of dollars from certain predatory colleges. I don't think Argosy has fallen under this scope yet. but we'll see where that carries out in the future. I'm still in touch with them. I'm still in touch with a lot of the people that I report on. Even if it isn't necessarily like, day to day, oh, what's going on today or whatever. I spent part of my life with you and like spending time and like you being vulnerable and like myself being vulnerable, like and having these discussions and like looking at you as a human, not just as a soundbite. So I try to keep up with people and try to stay in touch no matter like whatever the case may be.
So you're going to be doing sound bites. When I say sound bites, I mean like actual audio work when you go work for NPR out of St. Louis?
Yeah. So the bittersweet thing,
don't cry on me now, Brian.
No. I won't cry yet. I still have a lot of things I need to do before next week. But I took a job with St. Louis Public Radio, which is the NPR affiliate that covers St. Louis and basically the Metro East, part of Southern Illinois, just kind of the region. Recently, so I'm excited. I am going to be one of their staff. Well, their only staff photographer.
Really?
Yeah, which is exciting, nerve-wracking at the same time.
Yeah.
But I think of it a lot of like the work that I did in Southern Illinois, where I have opportunities to write and I have opportunities to do audio storytelling and obviously photo. In somewhere that I've called home for a bit. I've never lived in the city. I've never like really been on the Missouri side a ton. I mean, I've gone to Cardinals games and have done things in St. Louis, but never really like on the day to day. So that's going to be a little bit of a change. And of course, like, I don't know, I was tearing up the other day walking through Carbondale and I'm like getting all of these memories flooding back. And it's like, oh, I did this there. Or like, I don't know. It's like in the movies where you see like the faint silhouette of like the scene unfolding. It's like you're going down memory lane. And I think that's, one of the things that a lot of people, one of the big reasons why a lot of people like come back to like their college towns and like they come back to homecoming and stuff is because college and, those like spaces are such formative experiences for people. And I mean, I wouldn't be the person I am today if like I hadn't come down here.
There's the line. There it is. I mean, it's so real though, man. I mean, it's just a wild thing. And I mean, and talking about this with all sorts of folks, there are college towns all over this country, all over the world that give all sorts of different experiences. But there is just a certain essence of this place that is set apart from many, many other places.
Right. And, a lot of, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people like to rag on Carbondale, but I feel like it's like your younger sibling. It's like, yeah, I can talk, crap about it, but you can't because this is mine. This is my space that like I experience. Like if you haven't stepped foot into this space, I can describe it to you, but you really, I don't think can experience, it to the fullest.
Is your younger sibling going to come to SIU?
Yes. So I have a sister that's a sophomore at SIU, and I convinced her to come here instead of, some other bigger schools, some competitors, in the region. And I'm like, I promise you it'll be worth it. It may not seem like much at first, but really the relationships you build here, whether through school or otherwise. I was in marching band and still do stuff with the marching band here at SIU, and like those people are some of my best friends. Like I'm about to be in one of their weddings in a couple weeks, and like I don't know, we have this shared experience, and I think that's really special, and it's something that can't be really replicated, to the same degree, just anywhere.
Is there any part to your life that is not just the work that you do, or is like, I mean, is literally just that camera just as much every bit of leisure and personal time as it is every bit of professional and working time? Right.
So like I mentioned, like marching band and like documenting stuff, which I guess still is tied to the camera. But before that, like I played in the Wind Symphony at SIU. So like music is a really big aspect of my life. My pandemic hobby was trying to learn how to be a better cook, so I could cook more than just ramen and crappy chicken. So it was a lot of, reading people's life stories before getting to a recipe at the bottom of the page.
I hear that's the thing these days on the internet.
Right. It's like that. A lot of video games. your stereotypical 20-year-old type things, but really, I really like to go out and experience, what the community has to offer. Things, I talk about food and food being a unifier, and I could go on another hour about that, but I won't. Right. But like the Southern Illinois Eats page that William Lowe and his wife, set up.
Episode 18 of the WTF Carbondale podcast. William Lowe, quick plug there.
Go watch it.
There's been there's been mentions of like several different people whose like number of their episodes I just didn't remember off the top of my head, like Chastity and multiple other folks that you mentioned. Anywho, Southern Illinois Eats page. My bad. Food is a unifier.
Right. You could just have a related section and just list them.
That's what I need.
But yeah, food is a unifier. I mean, that Southern Illinois Eats page. One of the things I think after undergrad, where I really was trying to figure out what am I doing? What am I doing in this space? Who am I? Very existential questions. Mm-hmm. This food thing, and I'm like, I got out of Carbondale a little bit during undergrad, but I was just so focused and wrapped up like in this immediate community. Mm-hmm. I didn't really experience Southern Illinois as a whole. Mm-hmm. So at least once a week I try to go and like try somewhere new, or try to go out into different communities, whether that's Benton or beer and chicken on Wednesdays, or whatever the case may be. I mean, the food and the stuff that they're doing at Keeper's Quarters, which is incredible, and really just these folks that are really elevating the food scene. I mean, that took me out of Carbondale, and I'm like, this is something that I think, a lot of people can do and can get tied into that, isn't drama, isn't political, isn't, any one of these number of things. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about that page, even though sometimes people give unsolicited remarks, but be good to your people. There's a lot of us, I think, just in the scope of creators on social media and things that like don't get paid to do what we do per se. Yeah. Like a lot of the things I cover in the community, especially this last year.
Dude, you've just been
like, I just do it
out there.
I just do it to do it. And because I think it's important. Yeah. And it's an outlet for me, in a sense. But yeah, the food is a big one. And yeah, that's where you really, like, that's where you kind of test a journalist muster, like pursuing what you're pursuing, right? Is like, can they balance being an integral part of the community while also being an objective storyteller of the things going on. Right. Like, and there have been times where I've had, tips from people that like I know, and there's stories I've had to pass on because I'm like, I'm too close to this story. And like, it takes work to understand like where that line is. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's one thing that a lot of, journalists or future journalists, that are going through SIU and going through journalism programs across the country, are really trying to like find where that line is on, what the difference between objectivity in being a neutral blank slate, which is not true. Everyone has lived experiences. Everyone comes from different backgrounds. It is, in my opinion, absurd to deny those things, but it's being able to keep them in check.
Yeah.
So being able to balance that in making journalism not my only like identity thing, I think is really important too, which is the reason why I play a bunch of video games and I try to cook and I try to go to the farmer's market and go out into the local community and support the local community and those folks that are also trying to build up Southern Illinois or build up their respective communities. Because at the end of the day, like, we all still live here. Yeah. Like, even if some people think that, we're going after the region or whatever the case may be, we just want to see this region better than what it was when we started here.
Yeah. That's it. We won't even touch too much more on the Hawaiian shirt because I think we're all going to be a little bit better off than when we arrived here for episode 87 of the WTF Carbondale podcast. Have a good one, folks. Whatever that one may be.